So it's been a while since the last one of these I did. A couple of reasons for that. Mainly a lot of changes in my personal life. Just go over them quickly, pretty much just to keep people informed. I moved house. As you can probably tell from my surroundings, completely different from the other two I did. I got a new job. And generally I've just been really busy settling in, moving in. I've not really had time to get around to doing any of the diaries that I plan on doing, but now that I do have time, since I have a week off, I'm going to get them out of the way. So firstly, as you would expect, since it's been quite a while, I don't exactly know how long it's been, I have now finished the Darth Bane Trilogy. First one, obviously, Path of Destruction. I finished The Rule of Two. I've also finished Dynasty of Evil, which is the third one. And in this one, we'll be going over The Rule of Two, which is the second book. Now, I have some very different opinions on this book compared to the first one. Not all of them good. But I can now, having finished the whole series, confirm there is light at the end of the tunnel with the third book. So that'll come in the next one. But this one will be focusing on this book, which is, of course, The Rule of Two. While I'm here, I thought I'd just go over also the change in setup. Obviously, what I had before was extremely scuffed. Had a long way to go. I've purchased a tripod and I'm now using my phone to record. That being said, the audio is probably still shit. So if you can't stand the audio, I don't really blame you. To be honest, it's what I've got. I'm far away from wealthy, so I can't really afford a proper expensive setup, unfortunately, as much as I'd love to have one. And quite frankly, I don't really know whether it would be worth doing that, considering all I'm really going to be using it for is these diaries, which, you know, the phone is plenty fine for that. Before I was using my laptop here, I was using this crappy little webcam and this Bluetooth headset that also can switch to a wired one, which, to be fair, is alright. It's fine for being on Discord with your mates, but when it comes to like recording a video, if someone's going to sit there and listen to you drone on, it'd be a bit crap. But hopefully this setup will not make your eyes bleed like the last one, considering the webcam I was using before just was awful and literally looking at it caused me physical pain. So hopefully this is a lot better. I'm assuming most people are probably just gonna, if anyone watches this at all, is probably just gonna tab out and listen to it like a podcast, which, to be honest, is probably the best way to do it. But I thought I'd just talk about the obvious change regarding the setup that I have. I thought I'd just address it, since it seems relevant. And this will probably be the setup that I use going forwards. I might get a better microphone. I don't really know if I can be bothered to do that, but we'll see. We'll see. After all, this is only the third of all of these that I've done so far. I'm far from a professional YouTuber. I'm just a guy who likes Star Wars, who wants to go over the books again, so we will see about that. I would like to, but that would be like a long-term thing. So for now, this is what I have to work with, and I think it is far better than what I had before. Alright, so to get started, I think I will go over basically how I'm going to be structuring this video. It's mostly going to be the same as the last one. I'm going to do a bit of a summary about the book, go over it, basically what it's about, with as little spoilers as possible for people who might be interested in maybe reading it themselves before watching the rest of the video, or maybe just looking at a quick description of what the books are about, specifically The Rule of Two, this one. But I'm also probably going to then go on to talk about the things I thought were good about this book, which is really what I want to focus on. I don't want to focus on the negatives too much in general, because, you know, all books have their flaws. If I think a book is particularly flawed, I might go over the bad section might be bigger. And then I'll go over the things that I thought were kind of the in-between. It could go either way. And then there'll be some final thoughts. And that'll basically be the structure of this entire diary. I'm hoping to make this one a bit more concise than the others. So I probably won't go over the structure again. I'm going to try and keep the same structure throughout all of them so that people know what to expect. And obviously I'm going to list them in the descriptions. People can skip to the parts that they're interested. Maybe people don't want to hear about the bad, they just want to hear about the good, and that's fine. I completely respect that viewpoint. So that's basically what we're going to be doing. So, to start off with the summary for this book. The first book ends with Bane having destroyed the Brotherhood of Darkness, which is basically just a Sith, the Sith Order at that point in time in the Star Wars universe. Using the Thought Bomb, basically tricks them into genociding themselves, and they're also genociding, well, not genociding, basically mass murdering a shit ton of Jedi at the same time. And he also runs into young Rain, who later becomes Darth Zannah, and takes her as his apprentice. And in this book, at the start, Bane basically takes her along, and he's going to leave Ruusan, the planet that this war is going, that this war with the Army of Light is basically being staged on for this final battle. And essentially, what ends up happening is Bane leaves Zannah there, and he's like, if you're going to be a Sith, you need to basically prove to me that you're going to be worth my time. So he basically leaves her on the planet, and he fucks off pretty much, and he goes, you're going to meet me on another planet within so many days, and you have to make your own way off of this planet. And that's basically the start of this book. I would like to say that the first third of this book is great. Really interesting. Zannah, young Darth Zannah's entire escape is bloody, it's brutal, it's pretty fucking cool in general, and it's pretty great overall. Similarly, what Bane gets up to in the first third of the book is pretty great. And the side characters in this book I thought were significantly stronger overall than in the first book. So that's generally a plus. But I have to say, this book does suffer from a very meandering middle that goes on and on and on, and is a bit fucking boring, to put it bluntly. I do not rate the plot in this book, generally speaking. To be honest, this whole book could have been, most of it could have been cut out and just put into the third book. So I might have a bit of it. We'll go into this later, but I think I have probably a bit of an unpopular opinion regarding Bane and a certain thing that happens to him in terms of his character in this book. We'll go over that in the bad section. And the end of the book is a bit of a, people run into old enemies and stuff like that, and then Bane fucks up some Jedi, pretty much. It was alright. The ending was fine, but it's definitely nothing compared to the third book, that's for sure. This is a typical case. This book to me is a typical case of a problem that a lot of authors fall into, where they struggle to land the middle. Generally, the beginning of a story is quite easy to get right, and the ending is quite easy to get right, as long as you don't do something absurd and stupid, and it's generally satisfying. It's keeping an interesting middle section that is the trick, and I do not think that I can never know how to pronounce his name. Capuchin. I think it's Capuchin. I don't think he sticks the landing, unfortunately. Really, and the middle just isn't that interesting. It's kind of boring, which is a shame. But overall, it's an okay book. Lots of books struggle with that, but that's my general thoughts overall. Good beginning, very mediocre, too bad at middle, and an alright ending. Take from that what you will. I'll go into more details about the things that I liked and disliked about this book in the next section, but overall, if I was going to give it out of 5 stars, it would be a 2.5 or 3. Which isn't a bad score. I did enjoy reading it. It didn't take me long to read. I did kind of zoom through it, but I do through all books, whether I enjoy them or not, really. So I don't know really how to gauge overall how good it was. It's just that the middle kind of sucked. Yeah, I'll go into more detail in the next section. Alright, so the good. Things that I liked in this book. There are quite a few, despite what I said in the last section. Mainly in the first third, though. And the main thing that I really liked about this book was still, luckily, it's Bane. Bane is still the thing that I really liked about this book. Bane, with the disclaimer of in the first third of the book, Bane's a great character. Unfortunately, in this book, he does kind of get sidelined in favor of Zannah, and he doesn't really do much in this book. All he really does, in the first third, he's very active and he's getting ready doing things, but in most of the book, he's just sat in a camp, not doing anything. I'll go over that in more detail in the bad section, but basically all he really does in this book is make a holocron. That's it. But in the first third of the book, Bane is fucking awesome, and he's still awesome. He's a badass, he's cunning, his relationship with Zannah is interesting, and his continuous kind of preaching about the ideal of the rule of 2 in a way that's really convincing. Obviously, the rule of 2 is a very flawed ideology, and that's kind of the point. Obviously, as you see later on with in the prequels and whatnot, you do obviously see proof that the rule of 2 is a flawed ideology. The strongest of the 2 Sith isn't necessarily going to always be on top. The reality is that you can always kill your master in his sleep, and that doesn't require any strength, only cowardice. So it's not necessarily the case that the rule of 2 is always good, but Bane is always an effective ideology, but Bane really delivers it in a way that that really is really engaging, and it's really interesting to see that ideology really explored. Obviously, it is, after all, the namesake of this book. It is called The Rule of 2, so you'd hope they wouldn't fuck that up, and they don't. The Rule of 2 is the main theme of this book. But yeah, back to Bane. Still cunning, he's still badass, he's still threatening, he's still all the things that he was in the last book. Now, I wouldn't say I enjoyed his character arc in the first third of this book as much as I did in the middle part of the first book, Path of Destruction, because that's really going to be hard to beat for me. But he's still great in this. He's still as good as he was in the latter third of the Path of Destruction. He's still the same character. This book does begin directly after, as in within minutes, the ending of the first book. About a third of the way in there is a 10-year time skip. I think it's about 10 years. But the first third, it's really cool to see Bane, a young Sith, because he's still a young Sith, really. When you think about it, he's I mean, sure, he's killed all the other Sith off, but really he's basically like Luke was in the later books, where he's basically just kind of on his own. He's rebuilding the Order from scratch, doesn't really know much. And you know some of the stuff that he got from Rebels Holocron and stuff like that, but generally speaking, he's pretty young. He's pretty new to the job, and this really does come across quite well throughout the book, especially in the first third, because he does make a bunch of really stupid fucking mistakes that he really beats himself up for. He crashes his ship and almost kills himself. Basically messes up with Zannah a few times. He gets caught in a fight with some people who are riding monsters and basically, beast riders basically, and they almost kill him, and a couple of things happen, and he generally manages to pull through, mainly because of his just overwhelming power and strength, but also because of his cunning. But because Bane isn't just a brute, he's not an idiot, he's also an intellectual, he's a scholar as well. He's a man of two sides. He's not just a brute, although he is, and he knows when there's the time for thinking and a time for overwhelming brutality, and it's that duality of his character that makes him such a compelling, I don't want to say main character, more of a villain really, but it really is still present in the first third of this book. So overall, one of the biggest things that I liked, Bane, as you would hope. Another thing I really liked about this book, which is especially relevant in context to things I said about the first book, and that is mainly the prose, the way that the book is written. It really feels like the author, Capuchin, has really developed his writing in this book, and I mean that from a word-to-word prose perspective. Now, in the first book, characters aren't described. You get a lot of weird situations where, like, I mentioned this, I think, in the last one, where in the first book, there's entire scenes where it's not clear who's talking to who, and it just kind of gets a bit confusing, and that it's very kind of sloppily written, from a prose perspective, not necessarily from a narrative perspective. But that, for me, is not the case in this book. The prose is a lot better. At the start, there are random side characters who are described. There's a Army of Light veteran who's described as his face haggard, and his spirits are low, and the way in which he is basically a broken man is really well conveyed through his description, and that wouldn't have been the case in the first book, and it is very noticeable, and it's especially important because Zannah is a much more manipulative character than Bane. Well, she's not really, but overall, but Bane, she does a lot less stabbing people than Bane does. She does a lot more manipulating people because of how her powers work and stuff, which I'll go back into in detail in a bit, but a lot of her knowledge and her power comes from observing others and understanding others, and that really comes across in the writing. Back to the veteran example I have here in the book, this Army of Light volunteer is described as an older man, nearly 50. His face looks drawn and haggard, as if the grim task has sapped his mental reserves along with the physical. And this kind of description, it's nothing important. It is nothing fancy, but it's just something that was not present in the last book, and it really elevates everything in general compared to the first book. And although I think this overall is a worse book than the first, in this one way, this book is a lot better than I much preferred this book to the first one, and it really does help a lot, especially since the actual viewpoint characters are described so much more. I mean, you would expect viewpoint characters to be described, right? You would expect to know what they look like, unless they're like some kind of cipher character, like Harry Potter, for example, who's just, vague description of his appearance, because, people want to be able to put themselves in his shoes. But in this book, characters like Zannah are very heavily described, and their appearance is gone into in detail. You know what they look like. You know, it's not vague. You know their hair colour. You know whether they're attractive or not. With the exception of Bane, that wasn't really the case. You knew their race, maybe their skin colour. That's about it. And this book does go into detail where it matters a lot more, and that really made the book far more enjoyable from that perspective. And that's probably why I was able to finish it, even though I didn't even really enjoy the middle that much. You know, something for me that's really important in fiction like this, specifically in Star Wars, in Legends, and one of the reasons I loved KOTOR so much was, for me, the political world building, the interconnecting ideals and beliefs and different political systems and things like that bounce off of each other and create conflict in an interesting, realistic and believable fashion is really important to me when it comes to fiction in general. And this is really, for me, the greatest, the biggest thing that new canon completely fails at. And for me, this book fucking nails that shit. It nails it right in the first third of the book, because one of our side characters, Johan, I'm not sure if that's how you say it, that's how I'm going to say it, he basically, he is the Chancellor's bodyguard, essentially. He's sidelined as the Chancellor's bodyguard. He is relevant to the story because he believes that the Sith are still around. But basically he gets sidelined and he's like, yeah, they're like, yeah, okay, go on. Look after the he's not even the Chancellor anymore, he's the ex-Chancellor. And basically the guy just goes around and does diplomacy bullshit, and Johan follows him around and helps him out. But this is, even though Johan as a character is a bit boring, and even though he's of very little consequence, the political world building that takes place from his perspective I thought was very, very welcome. So just to go into a little bit of detail for it, at this point in the Legends canon, the Sith and the Jedi had been continuously warring with one another, and the Jedi would wipe the Sith out and then they would crop back up like a disease and another war would happen. Basically it was a cycle that they just couldn't fucking get to end. And basically this has been going on for about 400 years at least, as mentioned in the book, probably longer. I mean, if we're going to go by the KOTOR games, like the KOTOR games are, I believe, 2,000 years before this book. This book is set roughly 1,000 years before the prequel films. So this would make this film basically, I mean, I believe it 2,000 years after KOTOR. And the Chancellor in the past had always been a Jedi, which is kind of something that is mentioned in the KOTOR games, but it's not really mentioned in the films anyway. But basically, if you didn't know, until the Ruusan Reformations, which happened after the war on Ruusan with the Sith and the Army of Light, basically, for the first time, the Chancellor is a normal person. They're not a Jedi. They want to separate the state from the Jedi, so that if the Jedi want to go after the Sith, they can, but the Republic don't necessarily always get dragged into it. And basically, what ends up happening is this new Chancellor ends up as, the first non-Jedi Chancellor, which is kind of a big deal. I mean, if you think about it, by the prequels, it's only been 1,000 years since the first non-Jedi person who ran the fucking galaxy, pretty much, which is a very big deal, and really does go a long way with explaining why the Jedi are so heavily ingrained in Coruscant, in the overall culture of the galaxy. Despite their power, of course, there needs to be more of an explanation here, and this is really the explanation that I've been waiting for why the Jedi are so heavily ingrained, and why they have the big, the Jedi Temple is in Legends anyway, so big, like it's like its own mega city. There are thousands of Jedi that live in there, and it really does go a long way to explain why that's the way it is. And this same point ties really nicely into something I really like about Legends and don't really like about New Canon, and that is that in Legends, the Jedi were not objectively the good guys. You would have to be fucking insane to argue the Sith were, but that doesn't mean that just because the Sith are bad, the Jedi are good. And this book really, in one page, really dissects that really well. And that is when Valorum, the new Chancellor, is arguing with Valentine, I think he's called. Anyway, basically they're arguing about the fact that they are separating the Jedi from the Republic. They're now their own entity, and they are part of the Republic, and they're controlled only by themselves, but they don't have control of the army. They can't just send the entire fucking Republic army to go steamroll some Sith. And basically, at this point in canon, the Jedi really are warmongers, primarily. That's what they do. They run around and they kill Sith. And there's a lot of push and pull about whether or not the Jedi necessarily justified their actions. The Sith definitely need stopping, but there is always a lot of fallout and a lot of chaos, and a lot of people suffer because of this continuous battle between these two ideologies. The average person in the galaxy has nothing to do with this, and this was something that really was well touched upon in the first book, which is the idea that, to a lot of people in the galaxy, especially in the Outer Rim, the Jedi aren't the good guys. The Jedi don't give a shit about them, and it's really shown that they don't repeatedly throughout the books. But this speech that Valorum gives really brings this thing that I really like to the fore and really dissects it. So I'm going to have a look at this here. I'm going to read an excerpt from this book because I really think that this is really great. And it's something that I think if the people who are currently running New Star Wars canon could actually be bothered to read a book in their life, they might actually learn something. So basically, currently the new Chancellor is arguing with Jedi Master, basically arguing on the basis that the Army of Light be basically disarmed and the Jedi give up their military ranks, and that they cease to become warmongers and they become advisors, as they always should have been. And he goes over the opinions of the people in the galaxy, really, how people really see the Jedi, and you can really understand why. Here, he says, "Do you realise the ramifications of what you are asking, Tarsus? Your proposal calls for the Jedi to renounce their military ranks and completely disband our military, naval, and starfighter forces. You are asking us to destroy the Army of Light. The Army of Light was created in reaction to the Brotherhood of Darkness," Valor encountered, "but the Brotherhood gone, it no longer serves a purpose." Johan couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Its purpose is to protect the Republic," he burst out, unable to contain himself. "Protect it from who?" the Chancellor challenged, snapping his head around to address him. "The Sith are gone." "The Sith are never truly gone," Johan said darkly, "and therein lies the problem," Valorum replied. "Over the past 4 centuries, we have seen the Jedi declare war on the agents of the dark side time and time again. It is a struggle that never ends, and with each conflict, more civilians are swept up in your web of war. Innocent beings die as armies align with you or your enemies. Worlds loyal to the Republic break away, fracturing a once united galaxy. It is time to put stop to the cycle of madness." And it's stuff like this that I really like, because it's really showing that the opinion of the average person. Because the average person, there's not that much of a difference between the Jedi and the Sith. I mean, at the end of the day, they're just two sides fighting each other, and everyone gets swept up on it. I'm not saying they're right to dislike the Jedi, but I'm saying that there's a complete lack of this nuance in new canon compared to Legends, where it's like just nobody seems to give a shit. Everyone seems to love the Jedi for some reason in new canon, but it's just not realistic. Farfalla held up his hand, cutting Johan off before the young man could say anything else. He waited for Valoran to turn his attention away from the Padawan, then asked, "Tarsus, do you really believe the changes you proposed will do that?" "I do, Master Valentine." There was an undeniable conviction in his tone. "There are many good people who fear the Jedi and what they are capable of. They see the Jedi as instigators of war. You claim your actions are guided by the Force." This is something that I really like. "But to those who cannot feel its presence, it appears as if your order is not accountable to anyone or anything." And that's a line that I really like, because that is so true. I mean, come on. It's so good to easy to go on about the Force and all this stuff. And although the Force is provably real to a degree, considering the Jedi can run around just Force pushing people around, the Sith can fire lightning from their fingers, it's not necessarily completely comparable to real life religion on the basis that there's no real. Again, I'm not going to get into that debate, but it's very much a faith-based mechanism. Whereas I guess there's not really as much faith in the fact that the Sith can literally just crack people's, snap people's necks with their mind. That is proof that the Force exists. But the Jedi could easily be lying and just be using it to control the galaxy, and it's completely understandable why people would believe that. If you're a normal person, you can't feel the Force. You don't know if that's true. It could be bullshit. And so Farfalla goes on to say, "And so you would want the Jedi to answer to you," Farfalla sighed, "the Chancellor and the Senate." "I want you to answer to the elected officials who represent the citizens of the Republic," Valoran declared. Then he added, "This is not an attempt to grab power for myself. The Jedi Council will still oversee your order, but they will do so under the supervision of the Senate's Judicial Department. It is the only way we can heal the scars left by your wars with the Sith." And this is a very reasonable viewpoint. "The Republic is crumbling," he continued. "For the past 1,000 years it has slowly been decaying and rotting away. Rebirth is the only way to reverse this process. Many of the measures proposed in the Rusan reformations are symbolic, but there is power in that symbolism. That will be the beginning of a new era for the Republic. We will enter a new age of prosperity and peace. Let the Jedi show their commitment to peace. Cast aside the trappings of war, and assume your rightful place as counselors and advisors. Instead of this endless battle to hold back the dark side, you should help to guide us towards the light." Valoran finished his speech and looked expectantly at Farfalla. Johan held his breath, waiting for his master's outburst of righteous indignation. He wanted to watch as Valentine expertly and eloquently refuted the Chancellor's arguments. He couldn't wait to witness the impassioned defence of all that the Jedi stood for and believed in that would justify everything General Hoth had done. "I will speak to the Jedi Council and see our order complies with your demands, Your Excellency," Farfalla said, his voice heavy. And I will send the order to begin the dissolution of the Army of Light as soon as the Senate passes your proposal." Johan's jaw dropped, and he was too stunned to say anything. "Your cooperation is greatly appreciated, Master Valentine," Valoran replied, rising to his feet. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I must call the Senate to session." At first it seemed as if he was about to escort them from the room, but then he glanced at Johan. He obviously sensed the young man was not quite ready to let them at rest. The Chancellor hesitated, giving him a chance to speak. Johan, however, remained stubbornly silent. Valoran exchanged a brief look with Farfalla, then nodded in deference to the Jedi Master. "Please see yourselves out when you're ready," the Chancellor said, before giving them each a cordial nod and leaving them alone in the room. And, there's a little bit of wisdom here. Farfalla was right to allow the dissolution of the Army of Light, since there's no need for it. The Sith, as an order, are over. Of course, there's still the rule of two and all that going on, but they don't know about that, so there's no reason for them to act on that basis. So basically, it's stuff like this that I really like. I think it's really great about Legends, and this stuff is just littered like hell throughout every fucking page, and this is in one of the books that I don't even think that's good, and it's really something that they could definitely easily get right. with new canon, but they just won't. They just keep fucking it up time and time again, and I think it's a shame because they're so obsessed with the Jedi being the good guys and the Sith being the bad guys, and although, like I said again, the Sith are definitely the bad guys. No argument they ain't, but there's a lot of arguments to be made that maybe the Jedi aren't necessarily the good guys just because the Sith are the bad guys, and that's something that I really like about these books. I'm not saying that you can't argue that the Sith are the good guys, the Jedi are the good guys. I mean, if I decided one, it ain't gonna be the Sith, but you know, that nuance is there, and it makes things better. It just makes things better, and it makes the world more believable. In real life, people have a massive array of opinions, and if you emulate that in your fiction, it will make your fiction stronger, not weaker. And that's something that I really think that they need to get, and isn't hard to implement. The last thing, one of the last things I want to go over about the good is there's a lot of just generally cool stuff in this book, like in most Star Wars media, and I thought I'd just touch on a little bit. First thing I want to talk about is the lightsaber combat. The lightsaber combat in these books is very well written, because the way that it's written in Legends is that lightsaber combat is more of a game of tricking your opponent into slipping up and taking advantage of those small, tiny fractions of a second where you can go for the kill. And it really becomes a game of using the tools at their disposal, and sometimes it can be something as simple as the length of a lightsaber blade or the shape of a lightsaber blade, and it's the lightsaber handle, which are two things that are relevant, because Zannah, part of her, she uses a double-bladed lightsaber, but the blade on each side is slightly shorter than your normal blade length, which means that Jedi who've trained their whole lives against people with a normal blade length will find her attacks a lot harder to deal with. They can't clip the end of her blade and push it out the way. They can't defend as easily. It does have a disadvantage in that she has to get in close, but that doesn't really matter, because lightsaber combat is a game of getting your opponent off balance, and that tiny little difference makes a massive difference in tricking your opponent and ending the fight quickly. And this is the same with Bane's lightsaber, right? A lightsaber is usually just a straight piece of metal. The way that you can hold it in the hand is very much limited by the mechanisms, the biomechanics of your wrist and your arm and how you can turn it. But if the blade can be held at an angle, if it is bent, for example, I use this gun as an example, this rubber bang gun. You can hold it like this, right? And the blade will always come out in an angle that is determined by the wrist, right? If one can hold it at an angle like this, the blade can come out in a way that can be very difficult to deal with. And this, Jedi generally don't train to fight people who have a unusual lightsaber hilt. And this is obviously covered a little bit in the movies with Count Dooku and stuff, and his lightsaber hilt being slightly different. Bane's is the same as his, it's curved. So that means that he can hold it directly parallel to his arm in a straight line, and he can go in for thrusts, and he can trick, and he can do what he does is he fights them with the lightsaber as usual, and then when they're off balance, he'll switch the grip and put them even further on the back foot, because now they're having to deal with a completely different angle of attack. And that's really interesting, and this is basically how a lot of the combat is written, and it's really well done. It really is. This is not so much the case later on, because of my biggest problem with this book, which I'll go into in the bad part. But I just wanted to cover this. Also, the nature of the lightsaber as a weapon. The nature of the lightsaber as a weapon. In new canon, the lightsaber is treated as basically a perfect weapon. It can cut through anything, and it can you know, it makes armor useless and all these things. In this book, this is not the case. If you have you think of a lightsaber blade, if you go to cut something, sure, flesh it will go straight through, but metal or anything like that, it will go through quickly, but it will still have to be in contact with it. If you have like Durasteel armor, it doesn't just slag Durasteel, it takes a split second to melt through the Durasteel. And that means that Durasteel armor can protect you from a lightsaber thrust, it can protect you from being slashed, it will make a shallower cut, and the blade may have to get through the armor first, and this is something that isn't really covered, isn't really touched on in New Canon, but it is in this because Bane will fight people who have armor on, and the armor will make a difference. It won't necessarily save their lives, but it will make a difference in that if Bane can attack someone with armor on, it may be a shallower cut, they may be more likely to survive, they may be able to keep fighting because of the armor. Armor is not fucking pointless. Unlike in New Canon, where apparently this one that really annoys me about the Mandalorian is that apparently you can knock a stormtrooper out by punching them in the head when they're wearing a literal helmet to protect them from being punched in the head. Apparently the helmet's completely useless, so why they even wear helmets, God knows. But then when Mando's fighting on a train wearing the same armor, it protects him. So, you know, it's a bit of a, you know, he'll get hit by a gaffy stick and it'll splinter the armor and protect him from the blow. But for some reason, when it's him and he punches a stormtrooper in the head, it does nothing. But in these books, there is no such silly frivolities. Armor protects you, and if it doesn't protect you, it's not worn. It's that simple. People would not wear armor for the fuck of it. They wear armor because it protects from dying, and you know, this is a thing that's just subtly there, and it's pretty great. The generally cool stuff. Part 2, I guess. This book continues with the same generally cool stuff in the first book. This continues into this book. You know, the continuous description and the dedication to every creature in the book being something that's not a creature in real life, the dedication to every little thing. You know, they don't say paper, they say flimsy, because they use flimsy plast, which isn't, they don't use paper, they use flimsy plast, which is basically plastic paper made of plastic, because they don't use paper anymore. Come on, guys, they're way beyond using paper. All right, stuff like that, which you know, things will be described as like, you know, being as thin as as flimsy, not as thin as paper. And these are things, you know, and something isn't paper thin, it's flimsy thin. And it's things like that that really, really engage you in the world. And people say these things don't matter, but this is an attention to detail when it comes to writing that really does matter. You know, if someone said fucking hell in Star Wars, you'd immediately be like, well, you wouldn't necessarily be aware of why, but something would be off. Whereas if they say criffing hell, I think something makes sense and it's fine and it engages you in the world, and there really is a dedication to that, which I think New Canon needs to really sort out, because there is no dedication to that, to the attention to detail that matters. There is sometimes, I mean, there are some things in New Canon that I like the fact that a jingle version of the Imperial March, as they're like the Empire do, as their recruitment theme and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. But these things are very few and far between, whereas in Legends they're consistent, well, so far that I've read, consistent thing in every line, in every part of the book, everywhere, all the time. And it is really great. Honestly, it's fantastic. And this continues, I'm happy to say this continues in this book, so it's not a one-off in the last book, it is just a standard so far. Another good thing that I really need to cover, to be honest, that I haven't mentioned, is that in general, I think I might have mentioned it, but I'll go into it in a bit more detail. In general in this book, the characters are just a lot better. Not Bane, and not necessarily Zannah, but in general the side characters, that is Darth, Johan, and the other viewpoint. Well, these are the two main viewpoint characters that aren't Zannah or Bane, but they're just generally better. They're more engaging. They have actual character motivations, other than in the first book, Khan wanted to kill the Jedi because he is a Sith, and that's what they do. And Hoth wanted to kill the Sith because he's a Jedi, and that's what they do. And there wasn't really any depth to it. Really, it was just very cut and dry, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's Star Wars, like it's perfectly reasonable. I mean, wars happen, conflicting ideologies fight. That's normal, but it is not very compelling compared to pick Zannah, for example. Her willingness to throw herself into becoming a Sith and learning the ways of the dark side. She wasn't necessarily a bad person, but beforehand, but she understands. She is in a situation to become exposed to the ideology of the Sith. She's put in a situation where you can't really blame her for taking on this mentality in the world of Star Wars, especially in the Outer Rim, of the strong eat the weak, and that is not necessarily a nice reality, but it is a reality of the galaxy. And this is enforced and reinforced in this book in a good and satisfying way, and it really helps make the characters feel more alive. And you can kind of not necessarily root for Zannah or Bane in this book, but you can sympathise with how they've become the way they are. And Zannah does do some pretty bad shit in this book. Like, she just kills a whole family and steals their ship and stuff like that. But generally speaking, you can understand why, considering the awful situation she was in at the start of the last book, why they come to these conclusions, even if you don't agree with them yourself. I think, anyway. And Johan especially. He's a bit bland, but he has a interesting character arc in him becoming older and wiser. He's a bit of a shit Jedi. Like, he gets beaten in a fight by just a Twi'lek, with basically almost killed by just a Twi'lek with 2 daggers, and he just weaves and ducks around his lightsaber and just stabs the shit out of him repeatedly. And it's just like, you're a fucking Jedi, man. Come on, get your shit together. It does make sense because he's mostly a diplomat, but yeah, that was pretty good. I quite liked him overall. His motivations were fine, but his motivation to destroy the Sith is pretty well established, and you can understand why. This is overall not necessarily great characters, but certainly better than. I mean, they're just side characters, so it doesn't really matter. But they are certainly much more enjoyable to read from the perspective of. And Johan does have a lot of political stuff going on in his chapters, which is interesting and something that I really like. Might not be for everyone, but for me that was really good. So overall, the side characters are better. Darth is pretty cool as well. I think that's his name. I think that's how I say it. He is a childhood friend of Rain / Zannah, who joined the Sith, and at the start of this book ends up running into Zannah, and Bane cuts his fucking hand off, and basically he becomes a hermit because he's stuck on the planet. And he can't use a lightsaber anymore, so he becomes kind of a naturalist, and he lives among the bouncers, I think they're called, which are native to Rusan, and basically he gets dragged in to some stuff that goes on, and basically overall between him and then Johan, who believes that the Sith is still out there, even though none of the other Jedi do, and they kind of end up interacting with each other, running into each other, and that kind of causes the spark for some of the Jedi to maybe realise that maybe the Sith is still out there and go hunt down Bane, and then Bane kills them all. But apart from that, yeah, it was pretty good. It was alright. Generally stronger, definitely a lot stronger. That was a bit rambly, but yeah, not that big of a deal. Generally, the side characters don't really matter in these books. I mean, Galaxy is fucking full of characters. Really, it should be focusing on Bane and Zannah, which is what it does do. So, and that's a good thing. But the characters are there to push the plot forward. They serve a purpose, and they're not insufferable to read. There you go. Another good point. Sith Sorcery. It's pretty cool. I know people who've not read Legends might be aware of a bit of Sith Sorcery. Obviously, there's the Night Sisters in the Clone Wars cartoon. And they do touch a bit on it. But Zannah, as I mentioned earlier, because of her powers, I mentioned that they're based on her understanding of people a little bit. That is because she uses primarily the thing that she's good at is Sith sorcery. And the main thing that she's really good at is illusions. And she's also very good at inflicting horrors beyond your worst possible imagination on your brain and breaking you down and turning you into a mindless, basically a mindless husk that wants to die because you've seen so much awful shit just breaks you, just snaps you like a twig. And it's pretty fucking horrifying and it's pretty cool. Zannah's pretty great in this book, and to be honest, I really, really like Zannah. I think she's a great character. Not as much as Bane, but she's good. She's a good apprentice, and I really, really, really think the Sith sorcery goes a long way in making it more interesting. Sith sorcery, it's pretty fucking cool. It can do a lot of wacky shit, and it is kind of used as a crutch, as like a catch-all. It's like, yeah, she weaves a Sith spell to do this thing. And it's like, okay, fair enough. I mean, this is the Force we're talking about. It's not exactly a hard magic system. So, we've got that's the nature of the Force. That is Star Wars. It's part of it. But, I thought I'd mention Sith sorcery because I don't know when this book came out. That's the wrong one. Let me Google it. Right, so the 2007 is when this book was released, which means it was released before the Clone Wars TV show. So I can't remember if Sith sorcery is a big deal in any of the other Legends books. I do remember the Night Sisters are already in Legends, but I do think that's where they come from. I can't remember exactly, but I remember them. They look different, but they're basically the same. I think they're in some of the later Jedi Order books, maybe the ones after that. I don't remember really. It's been a long time, but yeah, the Sith sorcery stuff was really cool, and it's cool to see the strengths versus weaknesses of the dark side versus the light side, which is not really, which is kind of pretty well done in these books. Bane repeatedly gets injured, and he's always moaning about the fact that the dark side's pretty shit at healing. It can make you ignore your wounds, but that's about it really. And the stuff you can do with Sith sorcery is pretty badass. So yeah, not that big of a thing, but I just thought the Sith sorcery was pretty cool. So the Inbetween. I've not really got much to say for this section, but for me, the Inbetween will be the plot of this book. It starts off very strong, and then the middle part is very weak, and then the ending's pretty good. Okay to good. The overall story is a bit... Basically, it just follows Zannah doing some stuff for Bane, and then she runs into some people. She fucks over a revolution, Then she runs into a guy who's gifted in the Force, because he finds out that she's a Jedi. That she's a Sith, and then she tricks him into going back to Bane, and Bane kills him, therefore keeping their existence a secret. But my main problem, the reason this isn't in between, is because I do have a pretty big gripe with the story in this book. And that is that Bane is completely fucking sidelined. And I go into the why for that in the bad. It does make sense, but it doesn't mean I have to like it. But basically, Bane is completely sidelined. He does have some cool moments. There's a bit where he goes and he hunts down a holocron because he wants to learn how... He's trying to make his own holocron, basically, throughout this whole book. All he does is sit in a fucking camp, poke a fire with a stick, and try and make a fucking holocron, and sends on to go do things. That's all he does, and he fails 3 times, I think it is, to make a holocron. And then he goes and he finds Beliadazu, I think she's called, or something. I can't remember. She's a Sith Lord. He goes to find her holocron, because apparently she don't know how to make holocron. And then I can't even remember if that's why, and that's a bit fucked up. Basically, he goes to find another holocron. He goes into this holocron. It's full of creatures that are infected with a techno virus that's created using Sith alchemy. He basically fights a fucking army single-handedly to get to this holocron. It was pretty badass, so that was pretty good. That was pretty cool. I'll give him that. That was pretty fucking cool. But overall, the plot was a bit weak for me. So, even though it did have its high points. So, the plot is definitely going into the in-between. And it'll be the only thing I can think of at the moment that'll go there. The only thing that, if I can't think of it now, it's probably not that important. So, basically, this will be the only thing for the in-between. Bit of a short section, but... the plot was very all over the place. So, the bad. People are probably going to hate me for this, because it's kind of what Bane's known for. It's kind of what he's known for in the Star Wars universe. He's kind of known as that guy who has these dark side parasites on him, called Orbalisks. Now these Orbalisks, I do think the Orbalisks are cool. So basically he goes to hunt down holocron, and there's Orbalisks there, and one jumps on him and it bites into his body, and you can't get them out. Okay, so Orbalisks are parasitic. Basically think of like a giant woodlice that has a flat chitinous body, and it attaches to your body, and it bites into you, and it injects a venom into you that is unbelievably painful. It would send most people mad, basically. But this kind of have an advantage if you're a Sith, because pain makes you stronger. So if you're able to deal with it, if you're able to conquer it, the pain, it makes you stronger. So it has its benefits, but it has a negative as well, in that they feed off the dark side energy within you, which reduces your ability to use the Force, and makes you weaker in probably firing lightning and shit like that, right? Makes you a worse caster, basically, but it does come with the biggest advantage, which is that the shell, the chitin of the Orbalisk, is completely and utterly resistant to lightsaber blades. Now, these parasites breed, and then they grow, and they breed and they grow, and they will eventually grow to cover your entire body, which means that you will become fucking invincible, basically, as far as lightsaber combat goes. And this is basically what happens to Bane. He gets covered in these horrid, monstrous Orbalisks, and the holocron that he finds basically tells him how to create this thing that he wears around his neck and over his head, and over his hands when he sleeps, so that they can't grow past his wrist or his neck and grow in, like, over his mouth and kill him, basically. So his hands and maybe his feet as well, I can't remember, and his face are still vulnerable, but the rest of him is essentially fucking invincible, as these things grow to cover the rest of his body. And therein lies my biggest problem with this book. So Bane has just become fucking invincible, basically. He's reduced to little more than a brute. All he does now is run into combat with people who have lightsabers. They try and kill him, they can't, and he just stabs them to death because he can just walk through their lightsaber. They can't do anything to him. But this comes with the flip side of Bane is monstrous in appearance now, and he can't go anywhere in public. So all he does is sit in a fucking camp in Ambria, and he just does nothing. He does fucking nothing. He sits there and he just pokes a fire with a stick. He gets angry at Zannah a few times, and then he fucks off to fight some monstrosities for a holocron, and then makes his own holocron. That's all he does. That's all he fucking does. That's it. It's the whole fucking book from Bane, pretty much. And then at the end, he does fight some Jedi, but again, this is kind of a boring fight because he's invincible. Can't die. And this is, although it does come with the downsides of he flies into blind rages and stuff like that. It's the opposite of what makes Bane a cool character. What makes Bane cool is that he is both physically intimidating and dangerous, but also very intelligent and cunning. And he just becomes just physically imposing and dangerous in this book. His cunning has basically no meaning. It's really not important in this book. And although he is definitely influencing the galaxy from behind the scenes, you don't really see it much, and he's just kind of sat in a camp, poking a fire with a stick. It's a bit shit. And this is basically my biggest problem with the book, is that Bane does fuck all. I understand why he was sidelined so that Zannah had more screen time, but I don't see why it couldn't have been a 50-50 split. Because Zannah definitely has the most, what it feels like anyway, she has the most chapters in this book. In the end of the book, the Orbalisks do get removed. Forcibly. Basically, Bane fights a shit ton of Jedi with Zannah. They kill them, but the way he kills them is there's a Jedi Master in the back, and he's using battle meditation. And basically, Bane realizes he's using battle meditation, runs over to him, and fucking knocks him to the ground. And then all of the other Jedi no longer have battle meditation helping them, and they can suddenly feel the weariness of their bones, and they're getting tired, and they realize that this is a fight they can't win. And then Bane basically charges up a giant force storm, a shit ton of lightning, and he's about to obliterate all of them. But then the Jedi Master, the Thorian, who was using battle meditation, basically grabs Bane's leg and creates a force shield around them, and Bane releases the lightning, which basically just bounces around inside the force shield that he's in and fries him alive. And Bane almost kills himself, pretty much, which is pretty cool. And it turns out that, well, they know this anyway by this point in the book, that the one thing that can kill the Orbalisks is electricity, high levels of it anyway. And but the problem with that is that when the Orbalisks die, they release a toxin into their host that kills them. And Zannah was sent for a good portion of this book to go find out if there's a cure to get rid of the Orbalisks. And she does find out some info about the Orbalisks, and basically they're able to work out. They take him to Caleb again from the first book, and some shit goes down there. But basically, they end up still tricking Caleb specifically into healing Bane again. Last time he was forced because of his daughter, because Bane threatened his daughter. But his daughter's no longer present anymore. His daughter has moved on. She has left the planet, and this will be relevant in the next book. But basically she just he heals Bane again, and then they kill him. Zannah kills him, and they trick the Jedi into thinking that the Sith are dead again by getting Darth, and they get him, and they Zannah uses Sith sorcery on him to inflict horrors beyond his worst imaginations onto his mind for days on end, which breaks his mind, and they give him a lightsaber, and basically the Jedi turn up, and he just goes woo, 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 and goes crazy at them and just slashes at them with a lightsaber, and they kill him, and they're like, he was driven mad by the dark side, you know. It's really sad. This must be the Sith. And then they leave. And the Jedi believe that the Sith is dead again. And Zannah's just hidden with Bane in a basement, pretty much, using Sith sorcery to hide their presence. I made that sound really stupid. It's not as stupid in the actual book, but to be honest, the plot for this book just really didn't do it for me. So you're not going to see much praise for me in that respect for this book. And you know, specifically for me, the reason this book sucks is the Orbalisks, and that is, I think, will be an unpopular opinion because people really like the Orbalisks. People think the Orbalisks are really cool, and they think the fact that Bane has these parasites in his body that make him invincible makes him really cool. But I think it just made him a worse character. And I think that although theoretically they are cool, and they did serve a narrative purpose to sideline Bane so that there was more screen time for Zannah, I thought overall the Orbalisks sucked ass, to be honest. For me, I really just think it was a worse character. And especially since I've now read the third book, where Bane is back to his prime, back to being a great character, this really was not it for me, unfortunately. You know, this is by far the biggest problem I had with the book, and in fact, it outweighs every other problem I have with this book so much that I actually can't think of another problem I have with it right now. I probably will do, and it'll probably be in the video, but currently I can't. But that is the bad. The Orbalisks. The Orbalisks, I hate them so much. They are the bad section. The bad is just Orbalisks. So this brings me to the final section, I believe. The thing that I really want to say about this book is, I think, unfortunately, it is a worse book overall than the first one. And I think that mainly boils down to the fact that the first book was mostly Bane, and Bane's great, and it's really going to be hard to top his basically descent to becoming a Sith. Really going to be hard to top that for me. So there is that. And this book just has so many problems with the story. I'm just not that into it. And for me, although the plot isn't nearly as important as the characters for these kinds of books, because obviously this is the Bane Trilogy, it's not, you know, it's supposed to be kind of a character piece. And in that regard, I think this book still fails because Bane is so fucking sidelined, and he's so less of an interesting character than in the first book and the third book, having finished the whole trilogy by now. So this definitely is going to go down to the bottom of the pile for this series. I know I said that the first one, we're off to a good start. I think the first one's great. I think it's a brilliant book. It's not going to win any awards for the writing or anything, but for the characterization, it's for the characters, it's very, well, Bane specifically, it's a very good book. This one, the writing overall is better, the narrative is far worse, and in some ways the characters are as good as the first one, but overall far worse, just because of Bane being sidelined. So fortunately, there is light at the end of the tunnel. I have, by the time I'm recording this, finished, as I mentioned, Dynasty of Evil, which is the last one, which is brilliant. And we'll go over in detail about that in the second recording. But I thought I'd just go over kind of a summary of how I felt about it. In one sentence, worse than the first, but not in every way. Yeah. On to the next one.